sharing the work that we did and the paper that we published titled Activities and Impacts of Patient Engagement in CIHR SPOR funded research. And you'll notice hopefully on the slide that I've put my email down. So if you have any questions that maybe you're too shy to ask during the presentation, a discussion aspect, or whether anything pops into mind afterwards that you would like to know about, please do reach out. And I'm always interested in collaborations, as well as making connections with people who just want to talk together and talk shop about patient engagement and research as well. So please do reach out to me, and I'll be very, very happy if you do. So before I go any further, I would like to acknowledge Mr. Roger Stoddard, who is the patient partner that worked on his project, and he unfortunately died in December of 2022. And he was the first patient partner that I ever partnered with, and he taught me a lot, not only about engagement, but about life in general. And throughout the years, he also became one of my closest friends. So Roger, this presentation and a lot of the work that I do is in memory of you. So thanks for everything. And in addition to Roger, the rest of the team that was involved in this study include Nicola McCleary, Todd Duhamel, Carolyn Shimon, Serena Hicks, as well as Annette Schultz. So I'd like to acknowledge that the University of Manitoba campuses are located on the original lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene people, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation. We respect the treaties that were made on these territories. We acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past, and we dedicate ourselves to moving forward in partnership with Indigenous communities in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. So throughout this presentation, you'll kind of hear me use three different key terms. And I know that a lot of us have this similar background, but there may be some people who are new to this work or unsure. So I'd like to clarify that when I use the term patients, I mean individuals with personal experience of a health issue or accessing the health system, including care partners, who are also known as caregivers, such as family and friends. And when I use the term patient partners, I am referring to patients that are actively and meaningfully engaged in research as members of a research team, not as participants. And this type of research is referred to as patient engagement and research. So throughout this presentation, I'm going to have one slide that really gives you a brief overview of the background and why we carried out this study. And I'm going to spend the vast majority of my time talking about how we carried out the study, so the methods, as well as how we made sense of the data, so the analysis, and then presenting all of the rich results and findings that we had. And then I'm going to end with a slide that really just discusses the important takeaways from our study. And hopefully by the end of this presentation, you'll be able to identify different ways that patient partners can be engaged throughout a study's research cycle, as well as describe different types of perceived impacts of engaging patient partners by stage of the research cycle. All right, so let's get into it. And talk about why we carried out this study. Patients and caregivers are an important source of unique knowledge on what it's like to live with a health condition or access the healthcare system. And this knowledge complements the scientific and clinical knowledge that is possessed by academic researchers as well as clinicians. And in Canada, the Strategy for Patient-Oriented Research, or SPOR as it's usually referred to, was developed to champion, fund, and support research that helps harness this lived living experience through the active and meaningful engagement of patients and caregivers as members of the research team. And while there's increasing uptake of patient engagement in research, many academic researchers and patient partners still report uncertainty about the practicalities of how to actually engage patients in research as well as the associated impacts of engagement. So, as a result, we decided to undertake a study that set out to describe the activities and perceived impacts of patient engagement in SPOR funded research. So, how we carried out this study was through a cross-sectional online survey. And by cross-sectional, we mean that the study was a snapshot at one point in time that we administered through Qualtrics, which is an online survey platform. And I've included an example here on the slide of the first page, and kind of so you can get the feel of what the survey may have looked like. And this study was the first part of a three-part project, with the second study consisting of qualitative interviews that aim to explore patient partner motivations for engagement, as well as understanding of the patient partner role, as well as a participatory workshop that aimed to co-develop future directions for patient engagement and research in Canada. And the second study is currently under review. And the third study we are going to be submitting for publication within the month. So hopefully you guys will check them out this year as well. And so the individuals that participated in our study were academic researchers and patient partners that were engaging in projects funded through 13 SPOR funding calls that took place in 2014 through to 2019. And we identified these individuals through CIHR's funding database, snowball sampling, which really means reaching out to, in our case, social and professional networks, as well as asking academic researchers that we identified through the funding database whether they could please refer patient partners that they worked with to our study. Recruitment took place April 14th to June 8th and October 22nd through to December 15th. And this still was a cross-sectional study in that we collected our data at one point in time. Individuals could only answer the survey once, but the reason that we ended up having these two data collection periods was that the study was really initially launched at the start of COVID. And so we wanted to give individuals the opportunity who had increased clinical basically responsibilities, as well as, we were all facing so much stress and uncertainty, the opportunity to participate at a later time. And so for individuals that we identified through our CIHR database, as well as referrals to the study, we sent them an email that provided them a study overview, our study consent form, as well as a personal survey link. And for people who we identified through professional and social networks, we sent them emails that contain the same study information. And then we also used virtual recruitment posters in Twitter to try and drive traffic into the study as well. And what you see on the right here is an example of the photo of the poster that we created. So consent was inferred through survey completion. So it basically means that by clicking yes, I consent to participate and taking part in the survey, that is how we gathered individuals' consent. And people who completed the survey were given the option to either receive a $5 gift certificate or to donate the gift certificate to the Canadian Cancer Society. And as a result of this donation option, we ended up donating $330 to the Canadian Cancer Society. So thank you to everybody who helped make this possible. So in terms of the survey that we use, Audrey Lesperance and colleagues at the time had just put out a review that looked at the different types of instruments that can be used to assess the different types of patient engagement activities and impacts that are out there. And she reported that there was really no gold standard survey. Different surveys had different strengths. And after we had looked at all of them, we didn't really find one that exactly met our needs. So what we ended up doing was creating a self-developed survey that was based on our study's conceptual framework. And this survey measured respondent characteristics as well as patient engagement activities and impacts. And the survey actually was a lot larger than the information that I'm reporting on today, but we used the Patient-Centered Outcome Research Institutes, or PCORI as it's usually referred to, model for evaluating engagement in research to really influence how we measured patient engagement activities. And then we looked to the Strategy for Patient-Oriented Research's patient engagement framework, both to help us kind of conceptualize or think about how we were going to measure impact in terms of impact on research processes, health outcomes, and the health system. And then we also used the SPOR framework to inform how we measured the underlying principles and concepts of engagement, but we didn't report on these data in the manuscript. And lastly, we have a scoping review of models and frameworks of patient engagement in health research that really influence both how we conceptualize, so we thought of the study when we created it and carried it out, and also how we just big picture thought about the data that we had gathered and how we would present it and make sense of it as well. So the survey consisted of about 30 questions with skip logic, which means that not everybody answered every question. Some questions would only pop up based on your answer to the prior question that we asked. And the surveys contained separate but conceptually similar survey versions for academic researchers and patient partners. And so the main differences were the surveys asked very similar big picture questions, but what was different between them was the wording that we used and whether we asked people to report on engagement across the entire project, as was the case with academic researchers, or only on the part of the project that they were specifically engaged in, as was the case for patient partners. So I know this may sound a bit abstract. So in the case of patient partners, this is an example kind of that'll point it out. We asked them to report on the parts that they were personally involved in. Whereas with academic researchers, we ask them to report on the patient engagement activities across the different studies within the given project. So we established the survey's content validity by mapping items across the dimensions of our study's guiding framework. And what this really means is that we had our framework, we looked at the different kind of, like in the case of PCORI, how did they measure activities and impacts in the work that they did? We drew out their questions and we adapted them, put them into our survey, and then we went through our survey and again linked it back and said, what is this question actually asking? What concept is it getting at? And then we did that for all of the questions, applying the SPOR framework. And then also there were a few outliers that were informed by our scoping review. And then we established the face validity, which really means, does the survey look like it's asking what it's supposed to be asking? By going through the survey among the members of our research team, which were composed of 2 patient partners and 4 academic researchers. And then we also tested the usability of the survey. So we developed it on paper, and then we tested how usable it was in our online survey platform, Qualtrics, by piloting the survey among the research team, as well as 6 colleagues, none of whom were eligible to participate in the study. So in terms of the actual patient engagement that we conducted as part of this work, we engaged 2 patient partners at the level of involved, literally through the entire research cycle, from the grant development stage all the way through to knowledge translation. And so we use the framework that was originally designed by IAP2 and then really nicely adapted for the research setting by Manafo and colleagues to define what we mean by involve. And so when I say that we involved patient partners in our work, it means that we made a commitment to include the patient partners in all of the different activities that we conducted. But because the two study leads, so me and Annette Schultz, were the ones who ultimately made the study decisions, we didn't classify our engagement activity as collaborate. And so if you guys are like me, I like concepts, but then I also really like applications because they help me better understand what's actually going on. We also broke down our actual engagement activities in terms of the methods that we use to engage our two patient partners, which included we asked them to provide ideas and feedback during small and full team meetings, as well as ask them to help us design and revise study documents. And that was in writing and also through individual meetings that I had with them as well, so that they could talk through the feedback, as one of the patient partners wasn't very comfortable with typing. And as I mentioned, the patient partners' inputs and perspectives informed the decisions that we made, but the ultimate, like, final decision-making power lay with Annette and I. Although, as far as I know, we did incorporate all of the suggestions that they had made to us. And the factors that supported the meaningful engagement of patient partners within our study included early engagement. So we worked with them from the point when we were conceptualizing the study and applying to funding for it. We co-developed a terms of reference, which is really a guiding document that outlines roles and responsibilities, as well as more relational aspects about how we can create an environment that will foster meaningful engagement. So we did that at the outset of our study. There was an engagement liaison, which is me, which is really a point person that's in charge of ensuring the integrity of the engagement process, that checks in with patient partners and really tries to go the extra mile, as I think about it, to ensure that you are building a cohesive team where everybody feels like they can contribute and are supported to do so. And as part of this engagement liaison work, we really did pay mindful attention to the relational aspects of engagement. And lastly, the impact that the patient partners had on our study included their contributions to developing our underlying grant that ended up supporting this work, as well as the other stages of this project. They helped us design and test the study survey, as well as design the study protocol. They definitely shaped our data analysis and interpretation, and they helped us develop this paper that we are meeting about today. So in terms of how we made sense of the data, so we used just standard descriptive statistics, so medians, which is basically looking at the middle number of a group of numbers ordered from the smallest number to the biggest, as well as counts to describe the characteristics of our respondents as well as their projects. And then when we looked at patient engagement activities and impacts, we decided to do a thematic analysis that was led by me and in consultation with Annette Schultz, which was the senior researcher, and Roger Stoddard, which was the main patient partner on the study. So we worked as a little group together where I would do parts of the analyses, meet back with them, we'd talk about it, reshape it. And then after we were done doing that, we sent out our kind of preliminary analysis to our larger study team. And then we had a big, large half-day meeting where we talked about the analyses and how to make sense of our findings. And our theme development was directed by our study's theoretical framework, with one notable kind of change, which is, as I mentioned, SPOR really, when you look at their framework, conceptualizes patient engagement related outcomes in terms of changes to processes, as well as health outcomes and the effects on health systems. But through some of the responses, we noticed that there were outliers in that people spoke about the impacts that the research had on themselves, be it from the point of patient partners or academic researchers. And around the time, Aubin and colleagues have put out a really nice paper in CIMAG, which really talked about the need to kind of think about impacts beyond just research processes and health outcomes to the values that occur to patient partners as well as academic researchers. So we ended up absorbing her work within our analyses as well. And if this doesn't fully make sense, it will once I start showing you our findings. And as we were going through all of this, our driver and really all that I do is really thinking, how do we make our findings usable to patient partners as well as academic researchers? So we sent out emails to 511 academic researchers, of which 66 completed the survey completely. So that's about a response rate of 13%. And we have no real way of knowing how many patient partners saw our tweets or perhaps received emails from our networks telling them about the study. But of the people that we contacted via recruitment emails, so there's 28 patient partners and 20 of them completed the survey and were included in our analyses. So academic researchers had a median. So the middle age of academic researchers was 45 years and patient partners was older at 60 years. About 80% of academic researchers and patient partners that completed the survey self-identified as white. About half of respondents were from Ontario, although we did get responses from the different provinces as well. And in terms of the disciplines of the academic researchers that completed our survey, it was very heavily medicine driven, so biomedical sciences, with some respondents coming from other fields like nursing as well, or more generally health sciences. The patient partners that completed our survey were highly educated, with 45% reporting that they had a graduate degree and 30% saying that the highest level of education that they received was an undergraduate degree. And the primary perspective that patient partners brought to the survey was that of a patient. So 75% of patient partner respondents brought the patient perspective and 25% brought the caregiver perspective. All right, so big picture in terms of the outcomes. So in terms of our findings specific to the different types of activities that patient partners were engaged in, we identified 7 different types that included sharing experience or giving advice, helping identify or choose the research focus or methods, helping develop or revise aspects of the grant, study, or knowledge translation outputs, helping conduct research activities, presenting on behalf of the study, and other grant development or knowledge translation activities. And then the 7th one was participating in the study, which we got some pushback from the reviewers about whether or not we should include that as an activity, as obviously patient engagement is supposed to be more than being a research participant. It's supposed to be being way more than that, which is a research team member. But if you look at the actual spectrum of engagement that I showed you that we used to identify how we engaged patient partners in our study, the first rung on that continuum is research participants. And because the patient partners participated in the study as well, and there was impacts associated with that, we decided to include this classification as well, because there is a possibility that had the patient partners not been patient partners on the study, they wouldn't have participated in the study at all. And we'll also get into more specific examples of these activities as well, but I just wanted to start large and then hone in. So we also identified 6 different types of impacts that were related to knowledge outputs or directions being created, molded, confirmed, or chosen and prioritized, as well as perceived success of the research. And some people also made mention of minimal or negative impacts on the research that I'll highlight as I go through our findings further. And something to note is that impacts were not limited to the stage of the research cycle where the activity occurred. So just because a patient partner's activities was basically honed in at, let's say, data collection, that doesn't mean that the impact of this engagement activity resided solely within data collection. People reported that the engagement activities in one cycle actually had broad impacts that ranged across the research cycle. So the vast majority of impacts that we found were related to research processes, but some were also related to patient partner values in terms of feeling increased confidence among the research team, feeling a greater sense of ownership over the study and its findings, gaining research experience, and really the broadening of thinking around patient engagement and research. And we also identified some academic researcher values as well, including initiating new project directions based on patient partner insights, and academic researchers saying that they gained a deeper understanding of the patient experience through their work with patient partners. And we also identified 4 different impacts related to health outcomes or health systems. And these included strengthened impact of the study findings, increased richness of patient experience within health systems. So this is how, if you have read our paper, our findings, we ended up presenting them, and we are very, 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 very fortunate to work with a very skilled knowledge translation expert through the Center for Healthcare Innovation, who really came together with us and said, okay, you have all of this information, you are adamant about presenting it across the different stages of the research cycle because you want the reader to get an idea of how can I, well, engage patients at every stage of the research cycle and really bring mindfulness to it to kind of move past what some of us do, which is, oh, we're going to engage patients in research. And then you just kind of move forward without mindfully thinking, okay, how can I engage them at this stage? How can I engage them at this stage? So he really accepted the fact that we didn't want to condense our findings to a kind of to a broader level than we had them. And he helped us create these tables, which first presented the activities according to the broad categories, as you'll see in our first column, as well as gave specific examples of what these activities look like at the specific stage of the research cycle. He also helped us visualize how we could report the type of impact according to the different categories, which you see in those colorful little cylinders sticking out, but then also helped us show that, yes, that the activity may have occurred at this one stage of the research cycle, but these are the different areas within the study where the actual impact occurred. And if that wasn't even enough, he also helped us to be able to incorporate notes about the specific types of impact that people made as well. So everywhere we could, we tried to give big picture ideas, but then also examples that people could apply to their work. And don't worry, I'm not going to be walking you through these tables because they're great for the paper, but not so great for a presentation. So I've hopefully managed to kind of shift that into something that'll be easier to take away. So first of all, so there was a transcending, so universal activity through which patient partners were engaged. And that's probably pretty intuitive to what we think about patient engagement, which is patient partners bring their lived experience and they share that with this research team. And the specific ways through which this occurred was engaging in stakeholder meetings or exchanges such as emails, answering questions that were posed by the research team, sharing experiences with the study topic or the importance of the project to patients, and explaining patient priorities during team exchanges, including providing insights and issues and outcomes that matter to patients. And the reported impacts of these, I really thought of them in terms of sort of synergies. So they led to the introduction of other ideas and perspectives that may otherwise not have been there. They really helped shape protocols and outputs. They ensured the projects or the topic's relevance to patients, and they helped increase the accessibility of the study to patients. And the value to academic researchers that was reported as a result of patient partners sharing their experiences was that it helped the study become more real to the research team. So it wasn't just this more abstract thing that researchers were studying, but rather something real, something in front of them. And yeah, it just helped ground within the work. And in terms of reported impacts on health systems and outcomes, a participant reported that it presumably helped increase the richness of the patient experience within the health system. So now kind of moving into the actual specific aspects of the research cycle, the way that patient partners can help decide what the project is about is by helping to co-develop or refine aspects of the project through activities such as providing feedback on the overall project, participating in team exchanges to help develop the research questions or study methods, and making recommendations for the project's stakeholder engagement plan. They can also help decide what the project is about by helping conduct research activities related to this stage. So for example, participating or helping other patients to participate in planning and conducting stakeholder consultations, focus groups, and priority setting exercises, as well as reviewing the generated outputs from these activities. And examples of the impacts of these activities that we just talked about on the project include the concept for the actual study emerging based on the ideas that patient partners shared, as well as the enthusiasms that patient partners displayed for the project, leading to the actual grant being written to move the project forward. It also resulted in the introduction of outcomes that reflected patient partner preferences, introducing other ideas and opinions, as we've mentioned before, as well as introducing the relevance of topics and outcomes to patients. And we did have one negative or minimal impact of patient partners at this stage. And this was related to the fact that the project, the respondents said, was largely shaped by the funding call and needs of healthcare providers. And again, to that, I guess my own personal reflection is to really look forward and maybe help this have people help plan. Yes, the funding call may be asking for something specific, but there usually is ways that a patient partner or anyone on the project itself can shape an aspect of that. So even if it's a stringent call, still think where within that is their flexibility and really working towards having patient partners provide input in that aspect and being upfront about that as well. So now moving into grant development. Patient partners can help with grant development by co-developing or refining aspects of the grant, by helping plan or develop the overall grant, or leading, helping write or provide feedback on the overall or sections of the grant, through things like writing and the language that is used to represent patient viewpoints and experiences. And other activities that they could engage in is being listed on the grant as co-investigators, knowledge users, or collaborators, as well as writing letters of support for the grant itself. So The reported impacts of these activities on grant development included the ones that we heard before in terms of ensuring patient perspectives were represented, new ideas were introduced, as well as something that came out for me is really the whole concept of words have power. And grants really are the story we're trying to tell about why our project is important, why it does deserve to receive funding in a place where, funding dollars are hard to come by. And so respondents replied that patient partners helped strengthen the language and justification for the research. They helped enhance the readability, including identifying ambiguous sections. They identified sections, writing, and language that needed revision to reflect patient viewpoints and experiences. And they also led to changes in the engagement approaches. They helped strengthen the grant's impact. They led to the addition of a sub-study, and the concept for the grant again emerged based on patient ideas. And the minimal kind of impact that was reported at this stage was that patient partners deferred to the researchers, and so they didn't really shape anything with the grant. And to that, again, I would say it's the job of the research team to ensure that there is an environment that supports patient engagement in research and actual contributions so that everybody feels comfortable and nobody feels like they need to defer to anyone, because we all bring rich experiences and ideas. And that's why we're here together trying to work on developing a grant. So in terms of how patient partners can help design the intervention is through helping choose the research focus or methods, through directly helping select the intervention, or also through co-developing or refining aspects of the study. So helping develop or revise some or all aspects of the intervention, through providing instrument design and research methods expertise, identifying practical concerns. And the idea with that, before I switch to the other point, is I guess it's not that surprising, as our sample was very highly educated of patient partners. And when you look at other studies, it does seem, unfortunately, right now, that a lot of patient partners are homogeneous in the background characteristics that they bring. So yes, patient partners come with lived experience, but they also have experience from work, through volunteering, and through so many other things that can help identify practical concerns, that can help suggest the different types of things that should be incorporated within the intervention and the instruments as well. And they also participated in research activities through engaging in priority setting exercises, participating in focus groups, piloting the protocol, and engaging in a deliberative dialogue. And the impacts of these activities on designing the intervention included the actual choosing of the intervention that the study team went forward with, as well as what I really thought of in terms of fine-tuning the intervention so that the intervention materials reflected the needs and preferences of patients and other stakeholders, as well as resulted in an intervention that was more targeted and relatable to patients. And they also helped refine intervention protocols and helped make them more concise, based on patient needs, refined user experience, improved feasibility. And respondents also responded that the study was broadened to include novel stakeholder groups as a result of patient engagement in this aspect of the research cycle. And through being involved in choosing the intervention, value to patient partners that was identified was feeling more included in the actual research process. So really feeling a part of the actual research team. And again, a minimal outcome that was similar to one we heard before was that the respondent felt that the choice of the intervention was largely determined by the grant's outcomes, which again, I would push people to really think about what are ways we can all work together to shape things, even if other things are set in stone. So in terms of helping choose outcomes or how to measure them, Patient partners helped identify or choose the research focus or methods through identifying outcomes that were important to patients, as well as helping select among groups of outcomes that were already pre-identified. And they also co-developed refined aspects of the study through helping brainstorm and summarize initial ideas, helping develop or revise all or some aspects of study instruments, helping prepare other patients to provide input on the instrument itself, and reviewing trial plans. And they also helped conduct research activities by preparing patients to participate in consensus generating processes. And lastly, there were also participants in research activities at this stage through focus groups, consensus generating processes, as well as piloting outcome measures. And the impacts of these activities in terms of impacts on outcomes included shaping which outcomes were considered important, including ones that aligned with patient values and patient-reported outcome measures, as well as ensuring the relevance of the outcomes to patients. They also helped shape instruments through ensuring there was improved patient-centered wording, clarity, and meaningfulness of the instrument to participants. They helped add items. They prompted the study team to reach out to other researchers about use of the instrument in their specific population. They established the feasibility of the instrument length. They helped determine whether items were gathering the intended data, and they likely helped improve completion rates through all of this fine-tuning, refining that occurred of the actual study instruments. And then maybe I'll move forward through these because I do recognize we are running a little short on time. So in terms of the way that patient partners helped with recruitment, it included, again, co-developing or refining aspects of the study, so helping discuss and determine recruitment strategies, including identifying recruitment channels and locations, helping develop the actual recruitment scripts, and helping develop the patient-facing content. So, for example, consent and assent forms. And they helped conduct research activities, and really this involved actually helping recruit participants through both their personal networks as well as other approaches that other team members were using. So for example, reaching out to people through that were identified through databases. And they also presented on the study's behalf at patient recruitment study sites, and also presented to these sites on behalf of the research team. And the way that these patient partners could impact recruitment is through the changes that are made within the recruitment protocols themselves, through changes to the sampling frame that occur through helpful connections that patient partners have with other patients, through making the recruitment material quicker to complete and easier to understand. And when minimal impacts were reported, it had to do with the fact that suggested changes couldn't be incorporated because they were related to standard components of consent forms that couldn't be changed due to ethics. So in terms of helping with data collection, patient partners could do this through actually collecting both qualitative data as well as quantitative data through administrating questionnaires, as well as helping compile the data that are collected. And they also participated in research activities at this stage, both through piloting the protocols as well as participating in the studies themselves. And the impacts of these activities had to do with both the conduct of the actual research activities, for example, helping ensure that more open and honest answers were being provided by participants through the qualitative studies, answering participants' questions, and really helping ensure that the underlying processes were enhanced. Patient partners reported that through helping with data collection, they felt a greater sense of ownership over the study, they felt a greater sense of confidence among the team, and they also gained experience with facilitation. And a reported minimal or negative impact at this stage included that rigor was not always maintained due to lack of knowledge of research processes when helping conduct research activities. And to that, I would say that obviously we all bring different strengths, different experiences, and we have different roles within a research. So I think whenever somebody is going to help you with data collection, be it a patient partner or anyone, a research assistant you hire, it's the role of the researcher to ensure that the protocols are outlined, that there's a lot of practices that occur in order to help support the rigor being maintained within the study. So in terms of helping with data analysis, the respondents reported that patient partners were part of the team that analyzed the qualitative as well as processed or analyzed the quantitative data as well. And this really led to impacts in terms of new themes being identified, a critical voice being brought to the activity, in terms of looking at the findings. It helped ensure that they were more meaningful to patients and communities, that they better reflected patient experiences, that the messaging was more accurate and comprehensible, and that they served as a validity check so that the findings that are coming out, they're not just from the lens of the researcher, but again, bringing in another lens and making sure that the way that the data are being analyzed, thought about, aren't just coming from the academic researcher perspective. And I think that's very, very important. And then we also identified values to academic researchers and patient partners at this stage as well, which included academic researchers stating they gained a deeper understanding of the patient experience, and patient partners felt a greater sense of ownership over the findings. And again, a similar minimal impact that was related to the lack of relevant knowledge and support to ensure that patient partners could carry out this step. So very similar in terms of data interpretation, in terms of patient partners can help with that through co-developing or refining aspects of the study, both in terms of reviewing the results that have already been interpreted, as well as helping interpret the results themselves. And they could also participate in research activities at this stage through focus groups that were aimed at validating the findings. And the reported impacts include identifying additional avenues for analysis and variables to explore, helping put the findings, for example, into context, identifying the ones that are most important to patients, ensuring that they're being meaningfully interpreted and applied, as well as identifying missing content and integrating themes that are most important to patients into knowledge translation tools. And participating at this stage resulted in patient partners reporting a greater sense of ownership over the findings. And again, if when the minimal or negative impact was reported, my interpretation had to do with the fact that the setup wasn't there to ensure that the engagement at this stage was meaningful. And lastly, patient partners can help with knowledge translation by sharing experiences and giving advice, co-developing or refining KT outputs, helping conduct research activities in terms of disseminating the actual findings among their networks, and presenting on behalf of the study at conferences and in non-conference settings. And there was a lot of reported impacts on this stage in terms of changes to knowledge translation products, as well as values to patient partners and the system health outcomes. And when the impact was minimal, it was reported to the knowledge translation product, primarily being created by researchers, so that patient partners felt like their input was minimal because they didn't have a chance to input. And in terms of presenting on behalf of the study, this was interesting as well because it came out as a major impact in and of itself. And it really helped ensure that the story that was told, the messaging better reflected patient perspectives, and that it was more accessible to a wider audience than just academic researchers. And something that I found really interesting was that people reported, academic researchers here, that really presenting with patient partners, coming to the conferences with them, really helped them enhance their thinking about the value of patient engagement and research and how patient partners do have such an important role to play within knowledge translation. All right, so I've got one last slide. I'm sorry I've yacked on forever, but this is one of my favorite topics. So in terms of key takeaways, I won't really re-summarize what we found, but in terms of our application, the way that we developed the tables, the way that we thought about their findings was that we wanted them, whoever read this paper, to be able to apply it at 3 different levels. So first at the individual level, and really when we think about it, knowledge is power and relationships should be equal, but it's harder to have an equal relationship when you come into it and you're unsure of how you can contribute, what's involved. So we were hoping that perhaps patient partners who came across this paper, they could read it, they could think about it. And so when they joined research studies, they wouldn't necessarily need to look at academic researchers to direct them about these are the ways you can be involved, but that they could also say, well, actually, these are the different ways that I've read about that patient partners can be involved. And these are some of the ways that I would like to be involved, if possible, in this project. And also academic researchers from the flip side, also getting an idea about, okay, these are the different ways that patient partners can be engaged, and these are the potential impacts. Then in terms of the study, we hope that our findings can help guide processes in terms of engagement plans, as well as the developments of terms of reference that are really divided up about by the different stages of the research cycle, and that teams could come together and say, okay, so we're working on this aspect. These are the different ways that patients could perhaps be engaged. These are the different types of impacts. So let's take these as a starting point and work together to lay out a solid plan that we can revise as the study goes on. And in terms of systems, the big push I would say is also to the need to reconceptualize how we think about the potential impacts of patient engagement and research. So yes, on research processes, yes, on health outcomes, yes, on health systems, but patient engagement and research has very important and tangible impacts on the patient partners that engage in the research, as well as the academic researchers and other members of the research team. So I think when we think about patient engagement and research, it's key that we broaden our conceptualization to also think about these things and how we can create environments that will support these impacts to come through. So thank you so much. And sorry about the technical difficulties at the start of this.